I really want to start with your book. This book, like I said before, I feel should be mandatory reading for everyone on the planet.
Thank you.
It's a feat. It is, the research alone is as inspiring as it is harrowing.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
It's like a wonderful thing and also alarming.
Yeah. The statistics and the stories, right?
The stories.
The stories, the statistics we can't even have because no one's done the studies, or these stories from the past where we're trying to understand what women felt, but we will never know because no one asked them.
Exactly.
It's haunting.
It's very haunting. So I want to know, being an oncologist, New York City, you are Harvard trained. Clearly, that's a very busy job. You're also a mother of 3.
Yes.
What inspired you to write this book?
A lot inspired me. I think, having cared for thousands of women at really horrific times in their life, I have had this inside, almost sacred relationship with my patients about what holds them back from living. Because everybody, when you have cancer or you've been diagnosed with cancer, it really throws into high relief. What does your life mean to you?
Yeah.
And in that process, it's become really an understanding of what it means to experience illness. And I've been privy along the way to these heartbreaking stories of what has held women back, whether it's diagnoses that have been misunderstood, 10 years to things completely unrelated to their cancer.
Yeah.
Whether it was autoimmune conditions or pain that went unaddressed, and really just this overwhelming tsunami feeling that I had to do something about that and try to change that narrative. And I have a background in studying the history of science, history of medicine, and always been passionate about understanding how medicine doesn't exist in a vacuum, but is inextricably linked to society, culture, politics. And so for me, trying to figure out the path forward meant really taking a deep dive in the past to understand the legacy that I believe we all inherit, whether we're doctors, nurses in the healthcare system, or we show up as patients. And then, of course, in the book, I've been a patient myself. I care for women in my family, and really understanding just how hard it is to advocate for yourself as a woman on so many different levels.
And when you say you've been a patient yourself, in what way?
Lots of different ways. So as a kid, I tore my ACL, and I was a dancer and really avid into sports. And I was only 14 years old. And the orthopedic surgeon at the time, who was really incredible for his time, also said to me, well, let's see how active you become, dear. And, this was everything to me. And I went for years and years without a reconstruction of my ACL, only to have an ACL, just for everybody listening, is a ligament in the knee. I went, years and years with instability in my knee, only to require a large surgery later on. And we know now that women are in many cases 9 times more likely to have ACL injuries than boys. And we're still trying to figure out how to prevent them, how to treat them, how to properly operate, how to rehab them. And then, of course, later on in my life, I've been a mother, as you said, I've been pregnant, but also I had an injury that I talk about in the book where I really knew something was wrong with me. And yet I was kind of overwhelmed by these other opinions around me who were telling me that it was something different. And I had trouble listening to my own gut instinct, my own self-awareness, my own knowledge about exactly what was going on with me.
And that's as a physician.
As a physician with
at this point you were a physician.
This just happened a year ago. So I had all the resources in the world. I knew all the great doctors. I have access to care, and I have a tremendous fund of knowledge myself. And yet when it came to advocating for myself, I apologized for my pain. I listened to doctors that knew nothing about what was wrong with me, telling me that they knew. And I, delayed getting the care that I need, and it had real serious consequences. And it made me think, what does the average woman do, or the woman who has, limited resources because of her lot in life?
And what was the situation?
So the situation was I had a very small back surgery for years of running and not, warming up and cooling down, the whole thing. And about 6 weeks afterwards, I had developed a small tear in almost the membrane that holds our cerebral spinal fluid, or the fluid that bathes the spinal cord and also the brain. And so it was slowly leaking out
In the disc?
Yeah. So it was slowly leaking out in the area where I had the surgery in my spine. But what that meant was that I had less fluid around my brain. So my brain started to swell because every time I went to lift my head, I was losing fluid. It was pulling my brain down and out. And I basically couldn't lift my head without feeling like, someone was going to put a knife in my head. It was the worst excruciating pain of my life. If having one of my children without an epidural was like a 8 out of 10 pain, this was 100 out of 10 pain.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening?
So what ended up happening was, just to gloss over some of it or in more detail, there were several physicians along the way that told me it was something different. I was afraid to kind of bring up what I thought it was because I had already been told I was crazy for thinking that I was leaking this fluid. And then ultimately got myself to a hospital, but it was 5 days later and really excruciating pain where during part of that time I was just given Valium, which as we know is an anti-anxiety medication. Yeah. And I took it thinking I just needed to relax.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. So I am not to that part.
Yeah.
That must be
it's at the conclusion. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And I've gone back and actually listened to chapters starting at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because you do have so much information in there. And so I just got full body chills from that because you talk about how anxiety is just this blanket diagnosis, which is so much like all in her head. Like exactly the title of your book. That's what we're told.
Exactly.
You're crazy. You just need to exercise more.
Or you're hysterical. Or have a glass of wine and relax.
Or stop drinking and stop eating too.
Yes, stop, of course. Yeah, or take some Ozempic along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the book is really, it's a walk through history and in the body by organ system, because so much of what we think about historically is really reductionist about women's health, that it's just kind of about our breasts and our uterus and our main function in life, which is our reproductive fitness according to history, when in fact that we are entirely different from men. We are not just small men, but the diseases that affect us can be entirely different. Mm-hmm. They can be more predominant in us and present with very, very different symptoms than they do in men. I mean, we don't think about how autoimmune diseases are 80% more common in women than men. And we wonder why we don't have names for some of these. Many women go decades without a proper diagnosis, and we don't consider this a woman's health problem.
Right. Just another thing to tolerate.
Another thing to tolerate. It really goes back to this idea that women were, when you weave in history and culture and politics, that we were just destined to suffer more, and therefore we suffer better.
What is the takeaway you want women to have from reading this book, or not just women, people?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for everybody to read it.
Yeah.
Because I think there's lessons for all of us about equitable care.
Without a doubt.
I think, so much of medicine and the way we perceive our bodies is how we experience them, the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Two women could have the same diagnosis, but who they are, where they are in life, their experience with their bodies defines, again, the experience with illness.
Right.
And the reason why there's so much storytelling in this is because I believe that many women can identify with the stories of these women, even if they're from the 1700s or all the way going back to Greek and Roman and Egyptian times.
Absolutely.
And my hope for reading this book is to say to yourself, well, if after reading this book, do I recognize some of the stories that have been told to me that are wrong about my body, some of the stories I've told myself about my body, that maybe if after reading this, could you reimagine a new story, a more empowered story that you could tell yourself, a new narrative about your body that allows you to be more, to access our healthcare system better, but also empower yourself to do so even better, to advocate for that better health for yourself and for those around you.
Right. And I think really to stand up for your own gut.
Yes.
That's actually the chapter I'm in, is guts.
Yeah, the price of not going with your gut. And, and so many women are gaslit about, well, you don't really know, when in fact we do know our bodies. And we need to be empowered to have that voice in partnership with the healthcare system and say, I'm worried about this. This is what I think is going on. With your trusted medical knowledge, how do I partner with you, as opposed to having this warring ideology that you don't really know, dear. And it's kind of, it's all in your head.
Well, and clearly in the gender gap that we have in healthcare, there's not as much research
No.
in women, as you note.
Yeah.
It wasn't until 1994.
Yeah, you got it.
For
1993
the heart,
and 94. Yeah.
Right? And I mean, the person I just talked to was Dr. Jane Morgan about this.
She's amazing, isn't she?
She's amazing.
We love Dr. Morgan.
We love her so much.
Yeah.
And Dr. Somi Javed talks about how her mother was ignored, and then had a quadruple bypass.
Yes.
And then you, of course, tell the story about the woman who doesn't make it and who dies.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh my God, it's because her symptoms are different than a man's symptoms. And we didn't know that. And doctors aren't really taught this in medical school.
Yeah. I think what it really speaks to and what Dr. Morgan talks about as well is, we're greater than 50% of the population. Many of us learned in medical school that women's heart symptoms are atypical. How is that atypical?
Yes.
Right? And that's why I kind of go back in this book to show the history and the legacy of drawing women's anatomical function as inverted versions of men, inverted, imperfect versions of men.
Yeah.
And you see that language really play out in modern day medicine when we're the atypical presentation.
Right.
We may no longer be drawing, or referring to women's genitalia as like the inverted version of a penis, but we're still doing some twisted version of that today.
Absolutely.
And I think that what this really speaks to is the idea that we need a new language around women's health. I spoke before about autoimmune diseases, but many of these women who present with fatigue and joint pain are kind of just being lumped together with these amorphous labels when we need better language to describe what's happening to them. Irritable bowel syndrome, for example, is a female predominant disease, and we didn't really have any advances till we started to ask women, well, what do you mean by bloating? What do you mean by pain?
Right.
What are you actually expressing as opposed to just imposing some sort of pain scale or symptom scale without asking the women to use their own language to describe what's going on.
On the medical side, that translation that happens, right, to a scale. It's like, oh, we're going to do this test on you.
Yeah.
And it almost checks this box or that box. And then that information gets utilized to make a decision.
Yeah.
And that is such an inversion to say, what is your language?
Right. Exactly. And there's so much about medicine that has become fragmented, whether it's the way we divide the body into specialties that I try to mirror here with the structure of the book, or the way that we bill and these quantitative measures to try to reduce who we are into buckets. But especially women are chasing this concept of wellness because we've divided the body and forgotten the whole. And I think that there's so many qualitative aspects of medicine that we're trying desperately to bring back into the fold so that women especially feel actually cared for.
One of the stories that is just, it makes you cry. I mean, it made me cry within the first 5 minutes of your book. I was driving and I remember I was like, oh my God, I don't have like anything. And so I was, because it kept on happening. It wasn't just like one tear. It was like this really, it was very affecting. And it was the story about the woman who's dying of breast cancer.
Yeah.
And you said they weren't her last words, but she was like sweaty and then saying, I'm so sorry for sweating on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is like, oh my God, we've been apologizing for our biology, for all of our parts, for our anatomy, for our biology, every single part of us and how it functions. And it's so deeply sad. And yet, like I said, it also is inspiring because it really does make you want to go, okay, let's have the buck stop here.
Yeah. And even for myself, when you get to the conclusion, I mean, I'm apologizing. Right. How is
you're like, I'm writing this book.
I'm writing this book
saying,
and I'm the queen of apologizing. It's really hard to undrink the Kool-Aid that I think we've been drinking for thousands and thousands of years, which is, again, this narrative of apologizing for who we are, how we behave, how our bodies function in health and in sickness. And how do we unlearn that? It's so incredibly hard. But my hope is that in reading this book, that we'll just stop ourselves a little bit further, or be advocates for our friends or our family when we hear them doing it in a doctor's setting. I'm just hysterical, or I'm just like, I'm crazy. No, you're not. You're not, because we do that to ourselves.
It's almost like I want there to be a buddy system.
Yeah.
And I've talked to different people on the podcast about this, how you actually want to have someone there, with you, because it's so much information.
So much information.
And it does make sense, because when you're in that situation, like you were, and you have all this knowledge and you have a medical degree, you are a physician with so many years of training, and you're listening to people who are less educated than you are, and negating your own wisdom. And by wisdom, I mean what you're actually feeling in your body. Not your knowledge, but your wisdom.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, something we have to come back to, is how we can actually get more in touch with that inner wisdom. How we can actually trust what's happening in our bodies. Trust us to know, there is something wrong.
Yeah. Well, there's a long legacy of women caring for each other as midwives or the caregivers of their family. And one of the reasons why I incorporate history in this book is to really allow the reader to understand that at the turn of the 19th century, we had an entire revolution about our medical care system.
Yeah.
We didn't have medical schools the way that we used to. It wasn't an esteemed profession. We didn't have the ability to operate without pain the way that we do now.
Oh, God, yeah.
We didn't even know what germ theory was or that hand washing was relevant. And all of a sudden there was this explosion of knowledge. And in that, the fragmentation of the body, right?
Yeah.
To these different fields like cardiology and gastroenterology. But along with that, women were excluded from this knowledge. So women who had been privy to thousands and thousands of years of ancestral knowledge passed down, part of which includes that sense of intuition, that sense of healing power that we know women can tap into, and men can tap into it too. But that is one area that we've been at least a little more advanced. Right?
Yes.
So, and it's not something that we can't teach men to do, but my point really being that was pushed out. Women were pushed out from the medical system, and along with that, the feminine spirit of what it means to actually heal. And I think that's why you see so many women desperate for these self-help traps, or the industries that really capitalize on this sense that, well, you don't feel well, but your doctor's not listening to you, but I will. Your doctor may not have the right medicine, but I do.
Right.
And you see a lot of people falling into this naturalistic fallacy. Well, if it's natural, it must be okay for me. And that's not the ideal either. We want to get back to a better sense where we can have the best of medical science and all these quantitative measures that we talk about, but not lose sight of this intuition, this healing spirit that so many of us know is important to the healing process, but we haven't allowed for that in our healthcare system.
Yeah, this is where I feel like the buddy system comes
You're
into play.
You're 100% right. And there is powerhood in that sisterhood.
Yeah.
Powerhood in having an ally. One thing I find in my breast cancer practice, it's understandable when someone's newly diagnosed or showing up to meet the oncologist for the first time, they're terrified. They don't know what to expect. They don't know if they're getting chemotherapy, what their life is going to look like.
Right.
They've heard every horror story. It's almost impossible to absorb I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Einstein. You can't absorb information in that context, right? It's so overwhelming. You're just even trying to decide whether you like your doctor, let alone whether you can understand that, the schedule that you may be having and the road ahead.
Yeah.
So when you have another person there that can have notes, that can listen, be another set of objective eyes and ears and say, listen, this is what we talked about.
Yeah.
What questions do you have moving forward? It's incredibly important.
Yeah, I want a language around that.
Yeah.
I want a better word than buddy system, but I want a language around that where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, of course I'm bringing my
advocate,
my wise woman with me.
Yeah.
Or it could be a wise man, of course.
Yeah.
But someone that is reminding you, remember what you know. And
I think there's a legacy of apologizing that goes on when we show up at the doctor's office, but there's a baked in legacy of shame. Shame about, can I ask about this? Is this okay if I want it? I'm worried about how I feel.
Yeah. I recently looked up clit in the dictionary to see what would come up.
What'd you find?
Well, it says vulgar slang, whereas balls is not vulgar slang.
Fascinating.
Dick is not vulgar slang. It just says slang. So that vulgarity, because even in clitorology, right, is why I chose that name was
brilliant, by the way.
Thank you so much. Was because, I feel like the clitoris is like space or the ocean where we know so little. There's so much to know, and yet we know so little. And it's so powerful. We are just so far behind.
So far behind. And historically, we've lost and found the clitoris countless times
Yes.
in medical history. I mean, the number of times it was like this guy saying in their anatomy textbook, Eureka, we found. It's like, really? Do you think the ladies didn't know?
Oh my God.
Do you think they had no idea? The last chapter, it's called The Mother of All Moral Panics,
Yeah.
to discuss our reproductive function.
So scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in there, the anatomists during the Renaissance who claimed again to find, and they were fighting over it as
Yeah.
if they were, Magellan finding
yeah.
some new country.
Right.
That was hysterical to me. And yet, if
Absolutely.
you look at Grey's Anatomy in 1948, they didn't even have the clitoris in there.
Yeah.
So, as you know, we got a lot of work to do. And it wasn't
lot of
until
work to do.
2005 that we even mapped it. And we're still trying to figure out what's going on. But all of this plays out into my practice because I take care of women who are desperate to live and feel better. And why is it that we are 2 times more likely to ask men about sexual side effects from their cancer-directed therapies than we are women?
Exactly.
That's simply ridiculous. At every age, we neglect women's sexual function. And throughout history, the fear of female sexual desire and the need to control it plays out in every aspect of our medical care. And that was one of the things that was most surprising in writing this book for me. Oh, let me go back and look at the history of scoliosis, which is curvature of the spine. Let's talk about scoliosis.
Yeah.
Okay. Why are all these doctors saying that masturbation is the cause of it? Hello.
Unbelievable.
How does that happen? And these were famous doctors.
Yeah.
Or others that were so blatantly racist, saying that throughout evolution, what we're going to see is the loss of the clitoris because women don't really need it. I mean, really just bonkers to me. Or that asthma. Oh, you must be a masturbator. Don't ride a bike. Don't ride a bike because
The biking section is hilarious.
I mean, really? I mean, thank God I have my Peloton because that must be why I'm just full of joy all the time.
it must be.
Yeah.
It must be.
That's why they're so successful with women.
Oh my God. That chapter is just so unbelievable.
Yes.
How it was like, okay, women, you cannot get on bikes. All these horrible things
Are gonna happen to
and
you.
they were so ridiculous. And it was almost like the rules of today where it was like, don't do it, but do it.
Yeah.
Do it well, but also don't do it too well.
Right. Have sex with your husband, but only when he wants it.
Don't have it too much.
Don't
be
it
too
much.
good at it.
And don't
Be
be
good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good
not
enough
too good.
only he says you're good at it. And don't do only what he says you should do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Truly, truly amazing.
One of the women that inspired me to write this book was
Yeah.
this woman, Mrs. B, who went at the late 19th century. She was taken to who became this man, Horatio Storer, Dr. Horatio Storer, who became the founding member of the Boston Gynecologic Society. He also went to Harvard Med School, but had a penchant for sticking pokers up cadavers' vaginas. I mean,
Oh my
that's
God.
that's not a healthy behavior, right? Do we want that from our gynecologist?
No.
Anyway, he saw this woman, Mrs. B, and the problem was she was married. According to the husband in Horatio's story, she was married to an older man. She wanted to have more sex than the husband did. The husband claimed that there was an obstruction to intercourse. She said it implied rather that there was erectile dysfunction. But no matter, the problem was her. And the prescription was to replace her pillow with needles, to apply a chemical to her clitoris. And if a bunch of these measures didn't work, including not reading romance novels, the husband and Dr. Horatio Storer agreed that she would be sent to an insane asylum. So I wanted to look into more about who Horatio Storer was. It turns out his wife, his first wife, was sent to an asylum by Horatio Storer and died there in Worcester, Massachusetts at the age of 39. This is one of the founding fathers of the Gynecological Society in our country. So what is this legacy? What happened to so many of these poor women that simply had healthy libidos that were put in asylums for them, or in the 1920s had their teeth removed as a treatment for their mental illness, which maybe even was normal sexual libido? The torturous things that have happened to women are horrible and egregious and live on in more subtle ways, in the ways that we don't take care of women today.
The gender gap in who holds the power in the world, in the vast imbalance that we have in this country and in every single country on the planet, to me, can be traced back to the shaming of our bodies and of our biology and the enormous fear of our sexuality.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a lot to change that narrative. We should be thanking you.
Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for flying all the way from New York.
I wouldn't miss it for the world. You're an icon.
Stop. But go on. No, somebody did this to me the other day. They were like, stop. Like, keep going,
I love
but
that.
also stop.
No.
It was nice.
I won't stop till you tell me you're done.
But truly, these stories, while they are so difficult to hear, something really important, it's like, no, we must hear these stories. We have to know these stories, or else these things can keep on happening, and we can just be told that we're crazy over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. I think it's why the title All in Her Head, it was a winding road to find a title. This was not the original title of the book.
Okay. Yeah.
How'd
you get there?
There was a lot of different options and things thrown out. And even when when you start a book, you have a proposal, and I had a different title of that proposal, and it just didn't sit right. And my agent actually said, don't worry, we'll get there. And then when we started iterating, and then All in Her Head, as soon as you say All in Your Head, there's so many women that say, I have a story for you.
Yeah.
And this is the story of our bodies. Every body that we're in has a history.
Yeah.
And that's what I really wanted to capture in the title. And I think, I tried to encompass what so many women have heard in derivatives. You're crazy. It's all in your head. You're hysterical. It's not true.
I don't think there's a woman alive that goes into the gynecologist without some trepidation.
Me included. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Of course.
It's like, oh my God, did I do something wrong? Oh my God. Just the whole thing is so cold. And with that lack of your input, just like you talk about with the scoliosis patients put in the gigantic cast, teenage girls, and they were never asked how they felt. And it was just assumed, oh, they're fine. Oh, they don't mind not moving for 9 months. They don't mind it. And we still don't do that today. We're still not like, so how does that feel?
And so much about the history of gynecology doesn't include key aspects of our care. When I interviewed Dr. Lindsay Harper, who's a huge advocate for sexual wellness in women, she talks about when she says what her job is, that people think it's either about babies or preventing sexually transmitted diseases. And of course, we know that women are apparently the only ones that can spread throughout history apparently sexually transmitted diseases. I mean,
isn't that all our fault, right?
Of course, the specter of the dirty woman.
Yes.
No one talks about the dirty man. It's always the dirty woman.
It is.
Infecting the soldiers in World War I or World War II. Be careful of that lady that looks clean, but she's really not. Yeah. No one thinks about a gynecologist as talking about women's sexual function.
No.
It's just not relevant.
No. It's like there's something wrong or you're having a baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Happily, there are so many people now that are, kind of went from OB to now they're fully on sexual wellness.
Yes.
Which is exciting.
It is exciting.
We're still in this place, but I'm like, okay, how can we kind of get past this place where we know it's just like, it's terrible. It's terrible. Knowing these stories is terrible. And yet I want to be beyond them. Like I want to take them in. I want to fully take them in and honor those stories, honor those women. But also, I don't want to just talk about that over and over and over and over and over again.
That's depressing.
That's depressing. I want to go, let's decide what we're doing about it. I feel like we don't want our daughters to follow in those footsteps. We want to actually break that cycle. And this is a cycle that must be broken. I feel like the cycle of being ashamed that we have female parts is a cycle that must be broken.
I'm so overwhelmed and inspired to hear you say that. And I hope it has a butterfly effect and continues to ripple throughout our society and really empower women, and especially the aging woman. I've looked throughout history. It's like we're just kind of forgotten as we get older. Yeah. Our function is reproduction. And after that, it doesn't matter. And so you look at diseases of women in aging, and they are also underfunded, undertreated. Alzheimer's disease is 2 times more likely in women than men. Who cares for these women if we are the caregivers in society? Why is it that it's woefully underfunded and we don't understand as much as we should? That is a massive problem. And to your point about menopause, I'm so grateful that you're saying that, because in my community, in my world of patients, these are not women who are going through natural menopause over time. They could be a 25-year-old who we have to thrust into chemical menopause because estrogen is stimulating her cancer. So we need to render her one day to the next with medications so her ovaries don't function. And then on top of that, give medications that can further suppress what we call the peripheral conversion to estrogen. So other parts of your body beyond the ovaries can make estrogen. These young women have their lives changed overnight. And the historical narrative has been, well, we've saved your life. But the idea that we could give safely intravaginal estrogen is somehow, only now we're discovering that. There's no world where we would be castrating men and then not, doing amazing studies to understand how to improve their lives. But yet this is what we have done as part of the treatment for breast cancer for so many women without giving the proper attention beyond just, take an antidepressant for what can we do to actually help you live and feel better.
Again, that's like, it's in your head. Like, let's fix that. Let's fix that with this pill.
Right.
And then magically, you're not going to have problems in these other areas.
How about we just fix your painful intercourse? Why don't we start with that? Right.
Yeah,
we start with that because that's pretty depressing if that's what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And you feel bad about your body, you feel shame, you have longing for what you used to be. And yet, I'm not saying that there aren't many women who benefit from antidepressants, but that's not the answer for a lot of the symptoms.
Exactly. In your stories of going back in history, oh my gosh, just how almost our sexuality has been then used against us.
Of course.
In so many ways.
And that's what makes us crazy too,
That is what makes us crazy.
Yeah. You're damned if you want to, and you're damned if you don't.
Oh God, I loved the part on tuberculosis and the basically the attractive, the it's so amazing, that kind of, really it was like an awe around the woman who was frail and sickly and then who died and then became this kind of
breathless beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my, what?
Yeah. Well, we have romanticized this type of frail, pale, needy, breathless woman. But throughout history, when you think about different aspects of beauty that have been idealized, what about heroin chic? Or even
that's what I thought of.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I thought of when I was reading that chapter.
Even today, we think that we're coaching women about strength training and like thick thighs save lives. But certainly where I live in New York, everyone's on Ozempic because apparently there's an epidemic and everyone needs to lose 10 pounds.
How do you feel about that, by the way?
So Ozempic and these weight loss drugs, I think that we have an epidemic of obesity in this country and that there can be a tremendous role for the right population in helping them dramatically lose weight and reduce the risk of diabetes and heart disease. And I think we have really not taken a step back and thought about the messaging that we are giving to women, that being skinny is more important than having adequate muscle mass, because a lot of what's happening on these weight loss drugs is that women are losing really important muscle mass that can contribute to osteoporosis.
Yeah.
We know that strength training is essential, especially as women age, especially as they go through menopause.
Yeah.
That's incredibly important to maintain their fitness, their metabolic health, to prevent falls, their bone density. So I am worried about all the women that I see struggling and feeling like they've just got to be that size 2 when that may not be the healthiest version of themselves.
Right.
I think we have a pervasive message throughout history that women are prettier when they are small, not necessarily when they are strong.
I think that's come through loud and clear. I mean, it really is about taking up less space.
Play small, behave. And that includes in the bedroom.
Yeah, very much so. And also, by the way, only eat soft, sweet foods in very small quantities.
Can't be dainty. Can't be looking too
dainty
hungry.
Foods.
Yeah.
Some of the ads that you clearly have they're so well researched of that time, where just the use of language is so much about like, you are not a lady unless you are deprived and starving.
Yeah.
And if you show any appetite, whether it's to food or to sex, or frankly anything else, then you must be quite uncivilized and not worth anything.
Yeah. And that had real consequences. I mean, we looked at, there was a whole body of literature around this diagnosis of chlorosis, which was an amalgam of different medical conditions, some of which were probably anemia from women not eating any meat or iron-rich foods.
Right.
So much so that they were eating clay. It's a diagnosis called PICA, P-I-C-A, when women are so deprived of iron because if they're not getting it in their nutrients that they start eating like clay and rocks and other bizarre things out of a habit.
Oh my God. Oh yeah, that was a chapter.
Yeah.
The blood chapter was amazing. Well, I do love how you start with skin and then go into muscle.
Yeah.
And then bones.
Yes.
And then, throughout. Do we get into nerves? Is that the part that I haven't done yet?
Yes. You want to know what that's called?
Yeah.
The Bitches Be Crazy School of Medicine chapter.
Oh my God, that's so good.
Yeah.
Say it again.
So the Bitches Be Crazy School of Medicine. And initially I was like, can I really call it that? But then when I started to say to my friends, they were like, what chapter are you working on? I'm like, oh, the nervous system, the Bitches Be Crazy School of Medicine. I was like, yes, get to that chapter.
That.
So that chapter starts with quotes throughout history, including a Drake song, That Bitch Be Crazy, going all the way back through time, Charles Dickens, all the way throughout history of all the ways that well-known people, whether they be doctors or celebrities or movies, whatever it may have been in, women have been called crazy.
Yeah.
And it walks throughout history what that has looked like and how that's manifested as all in her head.
Yeah.
Whether it's the anxious housewife being given anti-anxiety medications or the women being lobotomized and having ice picks, through their nose and eyes to sever parts of their brain because, they were not normal and that rendered them more normal and sedate to all the more subtle ways that, we call women crazy today.
So if you could snap your fingers and flip a switch, what would be the thing that you would change?
I would change two big things. One, I would allow for much more dedicated research into female predominant diseases. They are woefully underfunded from the government and private sector. And we're not going to advance. Research is the reason that we develop new techniques and new treatments. So I would flip a switch and just funnel money appropriately and thoughtfully into women's health disorders. And then if I were flipping this switch, I would make it not just about saying, we have more female doctors, but I would create, if I really had a magic wand, unicorn.
I'm talking magic wand.
Magic wand, I would try to develop a system that was not pulled by third-party players, where insurance companies control the amount of time that we can spend with patients and that we actually can get back to listening to what women have to say, and from that, guide the research that needs to be done. Because research without a proper mindset doesn't get us anywhere. We need to be able to listen to women and we need to be able to have doctors and researchers and scientists part of the process to translate that research into clinically relevant and meaningful treatments. And unless we can inspire that, we're not going to get anywhere. We can't funnel money unless we're doing it with the right mindset. We can't develop a new healthcare system unless we have the research to do that.
Okay, that's a good one. I like it. Well, you mentioned that you have a New York Times article that came out today.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. So I'm really so grateful. There's been this groundswell of women and media who have said this really matters. Yeah. This matters to us. We've experienced it. And I'm grateful that the New York Times picked up on it. A bunch of different news outlets are featuring it just to show that there is this bias in medicine. There are these gender healthcare gaps that are pervasive and women are dying from them.
Most definitely.
And so just the platform to amplify that mission and recognize it's not just about this book that I wrote, but a much greater, broader mission to improve the healthcare of women. And in doing so, it will improve everybody's healthcare. There's a lot of work to show that when we invest in women's healthcare, it's not just the right thing to do, but it actually redounds to our economy. We are the primary consumers of healthcare. We are the primary decision makers for healthcare in this country and our families. And there's all sorts of reasons beyond just ethics that tell us we should be investing in women and investing a lot more than we already do.
Absolutely. We do make the decisions around money as well.
Yes, we do.
So we are those drivers of the economy.
Yes.
And one would think that would be proportional to the dollars that are put towards our health.
Yeah.
But they're not at all.
It's interesting. It's as if we're the drivers of these economic determinants, but we've not been allowed to be part of the compass. Exactly. And so I think if I could flip the switch, I would bring women into the fold of that compass.
Yeah.
And write our course just a little bit better.
Yeah. My two things
Tell me.
would be the way I see it is I see the world is shifted in this truly unbalanced way, whether it's healthcare or holding positions of power. It's across the board.
Yeah.
We'd rewrite that and really just put it in an egalitarian place.
Yes.
Truly. Could we overcorrect a little?
Let's overcorrect. We got some. We got to make up for a little bit.
In the fantasy one, it's greatly overcorrected. But in kind of the realistic one, I would put it in an egalitarian place, and also remove, like if you could just kind of remove something from your mindset.
Yeah.
I would love to be in a world where we were proud of our body parts and of our biological functions.
Yes.
What that would look like to be able to actually celebrate your period, to be celebrate your menopause, to be able to celebrate your vagina. Like just to really,
how do we do this?
Truly,
I want to join this party.
Right? Like that is the party that I feel is so important. Like it truly, if I had like a wish, like, okay, I'd like this to happen before I go on, before I basically pass on. I want my grandkids to live in a world where women's bodies and biology are celebrated, not tolerated, celebrated.
Okay, I love this. So a wish without a plan is just a dream.
Thank you.
So I want to help you plan.
Okay, this is where we have to have the pact. We're actually on this show, and I just had a conversation with someone
Bring it in.
Right? Where we actually make a decision about one small step.
Yeah.
Like I did with Dr. Malone, where we were like, let's not be ashamed.
How about we don't apologize then?
Oh, I like that.
We don't apologize when we go to the doctor.
For anything.
For anything. And the one thing that you've always wanted to ask your doctor about, but you're too embarrassed, or you think you have to apologize, I'm so sorry, but can I ask? Don't apologize before. Just get right to it.
My son calls it front porching.
Ooh, what's that look like?
When I'm like, hold on. Let me start by saying, and he's like, Mom, you're front porching. It's like, just ask the question.
Yeah.
And it's because there's that hesitation, like,
yeah.
Oh God, it's too much. It's going to be too much.
Yeah.
Whereas it shouldn't be. It just shouldn't be. Like, that's your job as a doctor.
Yeah.
Your job as a doctor is to like know all this stuff. So why should I be apologizing?
I know. There's this great phrase, you may be too much for some people. Those aren't your people.
Yeah, I like that.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So
as someone who someone has said before, could you maybe just like tone it down?
Please don't ever Don't ever. Be all that. Be all that and then more.
And I tried that. It doesn't work.
It doesn't. I tried that too.
Yeah.
Here I am.
Work. Yeah, here you are.
We found each other.
We did. And so I'm so happy that this book already, so it just came out a couple weeks ago.
Just came out.
And already Melinda Gates, you mentioned, is commenting
she commented on a New York Times post about it.
Well, how about that for funneling the research? She's someone who is able to flip a switch of sorts and affect change in a big way.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that too. I'd like to see from a philanthropic point of view, women's health specifically being prioritized.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the White House just came out with this women's research initiative, which is incredible, but they need money behind it.
Yeah.
So there was a recent funneling of $100 million that was just announced by Dr. Biden. But we need more than $100 million.
We do.
So we need to make sure that government is integrated with the private sector and philanthropic efforts to make sure there is enough money out there.
Yeah, there is.
For this to happen.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. Absolutely. It's like, if you can think it, it's there.
Yeah. We just got to plan for it now.
We do have to plan for it. So I like our pact.
I like our pact too.
It's no more apologizing.
More apologizing.
And if we do start to do that, we just kind of go back and redo it.
Yeah.
It's like a take two. It's like, let me do that again. I don't think we should apologize for apologizing.
I do that too. I'm amazing at that.
Sorry. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. That one, we're sticking to that.
I'm going to hold you to it.
Because I've got my 2 kind of annual appointments, right? The one with my gynecologist and then the one with my primary.
There you go.
And I'm the lady who comes in like with a list. My knee is doing this. Does it mean?
It's not cancer.
Yeah, exactly. And And I'm curious to know how that will affect my appointments.
Well, you're going to let me know.
I will let you know.
Yeah.
So where can everybody get this book?
Anywhere you want. It's at, all major bookstores. You can get it online. It's available everywhere. And I really appreciate the support.
Yeah. Absolutely. I texted you earlier and I said, your book is a marvel, a feat.
Thank you.
And truly a legacy.
Oh.
I mean, it'll get me choked up because the fact that you put this in a book, and not just put it in a book, but put it in a book brilliantly. Yeah. The way it's written is absolutely stunning. It is masterful.
Oh, thank you.
It really, really is.
You speak of legacy, and there are a lot of
mistressful.
There are many women in my family who are named Pearl who did not have the ability in their life to actualize who they are. And so much about this book is about helping women actualize their best self in their bodies. And it is also dedicated to my daughter, Pearl. And I have a lot of emotion around that legacy for her and for daughters to come. So thank you for honoring that and having me here.
Thank you for being here.